Before I start, can I take any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor T. Salim and Councillor Malik.
Yeah. I think everybody else is here, aren't they? Who's missing? Sian's here. I think everybody else is here. Yeah. Okay. Can I sign the published record of the meeting on the 28th of June? Thank you very much. Remind members of 106, section 106s, and obviously to declare any disclosures of interest. We have no business not covered by the current forward plan or under any special urgency. I note at number 5, section 5, we've got 2 references from Scrutiny, but I wonder if we could take them alongside the reports first and take them together. Yeah? Thank you very much. So we then move, we've got no recommendations from Scrutiny reviews and no petitions. So I now move on to the business proper for the evening and take the first reference from Finance Review Group. Are you doing that, David?
I'm sorry, I thought you were taking the...
Can I hold you up? I've got a very important message I must read out to you all. This meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public. Please ensure you have scanned the QR code poster before entering the meeting. If there are exempt or private items on the agenda, the live stream will cease prior to the meeting moving into private. There might be a short delay. A recording of the public part of the meeting will be available on the Council's website within 24 hours of the meeting. Attendees are required to wear masks on entry to the building and meeting room, but may remove them when seated. Would members and officers please remember to switch their microphone on when speaking, speak directly into the microphone and switch off when they have finished speaking. Any officers that are called upon by the portfolio holder should address the executive using the microphones marked presenting officer at the rear of the council chamber. Switch off all mobile phones or put on silent mode, please. Thank you. Sorry for getting to read that out at the beginning. Over to you, David.
Yeah, I think the view of the group was absolutely unanimous. It actually was the first time some of them had seen, they obviously hadn't seen the earlier versions. So, yeah, the resolution was that the executive be advised that Finance Review Group welcomes the introduction of the capital strategy and looks forward to seeing how it improves Luton Borough Council's capital procedures in regard to meeting set budgets and deadlines. It has to be accepted that the record of the council in meeting both budgets and deadlines particularly on large capital projects, has not been particularly good. And we are hoping that you're either going to take more care in setting the timetable and the budgets with a hope to getting them right, or more carefully manage the projects as they go along to ensure that they do stick to the aims that you set out in the first place. Record hasn't been good. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy, would you like to come back on that?
Do you want me to present the item proper, or do you want me to just respond?
Do you want to just tell us whether you're going to just acknowledge this?
Yeah. I'm very happy to welcome the motion as stated at Finance Review Group. I would note that I don't think what Councillor Franks is setting out there is quite accurate, because actually it's not my place to speak in that meeting, but I did look at the detail of the report, and actually the report had all of the capital strategy for the last year in it, and the column that was added up right at the end that had the unplanned overspends was a very small amount in relation to the multi-million-pound capital programme. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer to add some of what you were saying, but I welcome the committee responding to the capital strategy that I'm about to present, and I think it will be good. I think it will bring some extra layers of governance, which will be helpful, and I'll talk a bit more about it in a moment.
Okay, thank you very much for those few words, Andy.
Do I get to respond to that?
If you wish to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know it's going back a long way, but I recall very clearly the busway project, where it came in on budget only because of two things. One, the spend on land acquisition came in significantly less than you'd expected. And, of course, the busway was shortened by 1.5 miles because it was supposed to go past the Gypsy Lane shopping centre and on towards the airport. And, of course, it doesn't do anything of the kind. Stops at the railway station. So, yeah, I mean, I don't call that a great record when the only reason it comes in on budget is because it had 1.5 miles chopped off it.
Did you want to comment,
I would
Andy?
just comment that that is reaching back 10 years into the past, because that's when I started being a councillor. I think the busway was just being finished, or had just been finished, so it's quite a long stretch back to make that claim.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move on then. Andy, do you want to take this through the report then, please?
Thank you, Hazel. Yeah, so I'm presenting a new capital strategy for the council this evening. In 2019, we asked CIPFA to provide us with a review of our existing capital strategy. CIPFA are the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. And that report that they undertook for us in 2019 set out 9 recommendations which are set out in the strategy itself and have all been integrated into the approaches which are proposed. Someone from CIPFA, I believe it's the same person who undertook the review in the first place, also sat on the board that designed this strategy and has been a helpful point of kind of critical friend input through the process. Probably the most important thing, as well as adding additional governance that's already been mentioned, probably the most important thing that this strategy does is it ties it all very neatly around and focuses the whole strategy around our 2040 vision, which is that no one should be stuck in poverty and that we deal with the climate emergency, which are very big tasks, are going to require capital investment. It's going to require us to make decisions about where we invest and how we invest and what we invest in, and we need very good governance structures around that, which is what this report or the proposed strategy should achieve. So I would ask my colleagues to approve the strategy, and I'll do my best to take any questions, although I've not been able to download the report onto my laptop and I haven't had time to run and get my paper copy.
Okay.
So I should be able to answer any questions, but if it's particularly detailed, I might have to lean on one of the officers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Are there any questions from anybody? Yes, Aslam.
Yeah, I welcome the strategy. Obviously, when you've got a vision which is many years away, we need to have a clear plan what that journey looks like, and this really formalizes our approach, both looking at short, medium and long-term approach and the projects and how we will be managing them. So, you know, you've been very clear, and I think it's really good and it's welcomed.
Thank you. Anybody else? Tom?
Yeah, if I could, in paragraph 8, you talk about a new strategy coming forward for officers and members to be trained on how to monitor the new capital strategy. What member involvement do you see in it? And secondly, how can we make sure it fits in with our climate change ambitions, all capital projects? Are we going to have a monitoring situation to ensure that it fits in with all our climate change ambitions, not rather than the officers just going away and saying, well, if we do this and this, it'll save us a few bob, but it might not fit in, we want to do all the climate change. So how are we going to ensure everything fits together?
Yeah, I think this is where vision is really important, actually. So centering it all around our 2040 ambitions should really mean that we are able to make those big decisions and see the whole picture. I think there's an important bit of work that we're looking at undertaking around what Luton will look like by 2040 if we've dealt with the climate emergency. And I think that kind of, those bits of vision about where we actually want to get to help you to stand back and look at the capital strategy and think about actually that and that now, and then this and this a bit later, and it helps you to prioritise. And that's actually going to be important because we can't we're not going to be able to do everything. You know, there are different types of capital projects. There's capital projects where it's actually investor save because you're going to be able to take money out of the revenue budget once you've invested in a few years' time, and actually the capital investment pays for itself. And there's grant funded stuff, but then there's also projects where actually you're investing, so things like cycle routes, they're not going to pay for themselves, or not in any clear and way that you can map out so that you can actually take the money out of the revenue budget over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years or whatever it would be. So that's where we're going to really need to do some prioritising, which is where this strategy should really help in terms of members being much more involved at an earlier stage than we have been. We've always seen the capital strategy, but this should mean that we're much earlier involved. We get to see all of the things that came in, and we can do that bit of standing back with officers at that time. They'll have done it as a first trawl through because that's their job, but we'll be able to stand back with them and look at everything that came in and either confirm or say actually this thing needs to be prioritised a bit more, and we can make decisions that way. So I think it really will help, and we can, I believe we've agreed that it's going to go through policy group in terms of the part of the decision-making body where we actually look at the detail of it. If that doesn't work, if we want to move it or look at it twice, we can iterate the strategy over future years to make it work for us as best as we can. But yeah, I think it's really good that we've centred it around Luton 2040, which is making sure no one's stuck in poverty, addressing the climate emergency, and that should allow us to stand back and make the best decisions we can. We've not got as much money as we would want, I'm sure, but we should be able to prioritise things and have the best impact that we can to be able to achieve our ambitions.
I was just going to refer Tom, actually, Councillor Shaw, to Appendix B, because in terms of net zero, that is a key investment principle and a shortlisting criteria for capital bids. So, and it's highly weighted. So I think you'll get some reassurance there if you look at Appendix B to see how we prioritise that.
Yeah, I can understand that, Nick, and I like what Andy said, but what I'd like to say, at the moment we're doing impact assessment on basically anything that comes forward. I'd like to see on top of that a climate impact assessment as part of that. I know it's a one line in the existing impact assessment, but a separate page on will it have any effect on climate change, what it'll help, whether it'll help or it'll hinder, as part of a one-off on everything we do, impact assessment on climate change instead of just all the other stuff.
I think that's a bigger piece of work across all of the council's policy areas, isn't it? That I think what we're talking about here, I think it's a much bigger piece of work, but certainly I think we've got it covered in relation to the capital bids here. Absolutely, I'm convinced of that.
Anybody else? Okay, are we happy to agree the report? Thank you very much. And now move on to the second reference from an overview of the Scrutiny Board regarding the litter strategy. David, did you want to say?
Yep, thank you. Yes, another unanimous decision of the Overview and Scrutiny Board. I'm pleased. I like decisions to be unanimous from Scrutiny. Welcome the increasing the fixed penalty maximum to £150, but we were well aware, as indeed you guys are, I know, that fixed penalty notices on their own are not the complete answer. There is clearly a need for a great deal more education and publicity, and both of those things cost money, and the thought occurred to some members that maybe fast food takeaways, as one of the key sources of a lot of the litter that goes all over the town, might be persuaded to actually put their hands in their pockets and contribute towards a budget. Clearly, they're not going to do that unless there's some means of, shall we say, encouraging them. But we think it's quite important that you take a look at that issue to see whether there is some way you can squeeze some money out of them, because you do need more money, not just for enforcement, but for education and publicity on the issue. It is a serious issue across the town.
Thank you, David. Abbas.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, can I take this item and item 10 together, yeah?
Yeah.
So I'll answer the first two questions
bit,
from Councillor Franks. regarding the rehab education and publicity and enforcement. This will be included in a wider review of the current provisions and the opportunity to ramp up campaigns and enforcement across the spectrum of antisocial behaviour and environmental crime generally. The second part, fast food takeaways made countable. Currently there is no obligatory requirement on takeaways to contribute financially to mitigating the impact of their business. However, in a recent government paper, MHCLG Building Better High Street aims to review planning practices, guidance in relation to litter, to provide further advice on how planning conditions can reasonably be applied to prevent the clean-up litter caused by fast food outlets, which are most likely to generate it. Officers have committed to monitoring the progress of this review and any further impacts. Moving on to item 10, the purpose of the report is to agree introduction of the anti-littering strategy and increasing the fixed penalty for littering to the maximum £150, currently set at £75, retaining an early payment discounted amount of £75, currently £50 if paid early. The strategy aims to eradicate littering at local level, promote civic pride and change behaviours, take environment action where appropriate. Increasing the fixed penalty amount is to an act to deter to those who chose to litter and will be supported by a strong anti-littering communication campaign. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Abbas. I open it up for questions before I go back to anyone. Aslam?
Yeah, this is an issue when we have lots of takeaways across the town, and when these takeaways do get a license, quite often they are asked to put bins outside. Now, so they do that. Unfortunately, the members of public, when they get their takeaways, they either sit in their cars or drive out and unfortunately end up throwing the rest of the remains or leftover, and including those boxes on the street. So I would be quite interested to see how we're going to be educating the members of the public to be responsible. Enforcement, I can understand, you'll be, I understand that you'd be sort of looking at, recruiting more enforcement officers, but there won't be enough to go around the town. So something has to be done where people do take responsibility and not throw litter on the street. We have led a lot of campaigns, tidying up the town. People have volunteered. They have done a tremendous job, but problem still remains because people still end up throwing stuff on the street. So something has to be done. Something radical has to be done. So I mean, I'd be interested to hear what that education element will look like.
I believe currently Sean Askins, I'll come to you, Tom, is doing something around education with fellow members, and we could align this as well with that package, because they are going out to different faith organisations, to schools, to educate young children. Typical example, this weekend, I was in Curry's car park. Yeah, there was a bin there, they had big, massive bins, and I saw people just eat at McDonald's and just chuck it in the car park, right next to a big, massive bin. And you are right, I think some institutes, organisations, businesses have to take this responsibility, even maybe within their own premises, packaging, instead of making it branding, say, can you throw it in the litter bins or something like this? But definitely need to be communication and education. I agree with that. Tom?
Okay. Yes. Don't give him too many chances.
A lot of the education is taking place at the moment. I don't know. I think she's a star of the town at the moment, Phil, and she's got all these kids in every part of Luton, litter picking through the schools and everything else. It's working. We've got now some volunteer members what are going into religious establishments, schools, everything else, to talk about recycling, litter picking, that kind of stuff. We can get to the kids. It's the grown-ups what causes a problem in Luton. And a perfect example, Wednesday night, driving down Stonygate Road, traffic one end to the other as normal. Car in front of me just opens his car door. Woman sat on the back seat with a baby, takes a nappy, opens the car door and just throws it under the car. So I actually got out of the car and collared him, and it got a bit verbal, but she picked the nappy up and put it in the bin, but was less than 10 steps away. But she just thought, what we've got to do is we've already asked the officers to have a look. I believe we can put planning conditions on for any big takeaways and everything else, and see if we get challenged by putting that planning condition on. How can Dunstable have a planning condition that the around McDonald's takeaway, they have a litter pick around there all the time? We don't have the same condition on ours in Luton. And the reason I know that is the branch manager was one of our ward members, and he was totally surprised when he had to take over the one near Curry's and didn't have to employ someone to pick up the litter in the car park. But that's down to us not putting the conditions on there. We've already asked the officers through our portfolio meeting. We have joint portfolio meetings now to make sure we can get it word out quicker. And we're all speaking with the same, voice. What we need is this, the education, but planning and licensing has got to be our biggest ones. We get planning enforcement for them to actually employ people or put pins out there, and licensing that they've got to have a bin there as part of the licence. For some reason the officers are a bit reticent. But if other councils can do it, why can't we do it? But the enforcement is a big one. And I believe there should be a wall of shame. Everyone we catch, their picture should go up there. We're going to do it with a court car. I think there's 100 and, how many have you got now, Alice? 130 waiting to go to court, what have been caught fly tipping. What refused to pay the PIN notice, so we're taking them to court. Once they've been convicted in court, we should publish their names and addresses. And it's not just here, it's everywhere. One of them got caught because he had his notice in his back pocket because he was being taken to court by a London council, and he put it in with his rubbish. Guess what he's been taken to court for by the London council? Fly tipping. We've got to publicise it, we've got to get it out there. We've got members now going around all the religious establishments to try and talk to the women and the kids groups. We'll get to the schools, we'll get everywhere else. But the grown-ups, I'm sorry, they think it's normal. Just around the corner from me, and it is a private hire driver, pulls up, sits there and has his tea, so it's nice and quiet, and then throws it under the car and drives off. We catch him, his licence should be gone. Because he's as bad as anyone else. I think it's time to get out. We've tried all the nice bits. We've tried the adverts on the buses. We've tried all that kind of stuff. All the sympathy I used to have has now gone. Now's the time to get really tough, really hard. And when we get a conviction, because you refuse to pay the PIN notice, they should go on a wall of shame in the town or whatever. So people realise that if you get caught, this is what's going to happen to you. And that's where we've got to go now.
Thank you, Hazel. Yeah, I totally agree with Tom just there. Just coming away from this a little bit, it's a much bigger picture than what we think in relation to antisocial behaviour, because the campaigning we're all looking to do is a big thing over speeding, because the police ain't able to enforce it. Somebody's got to do something about it. Jumping at traffic lights, people parking where they like, doing exactly the way they want to. The problem is with all this little stuff, if they think they're getting away with this little stuff, they go into the bigger stuff and try and get away with that also. So it is something we need to consider. The campaigning and education probably is the only way to do it, because no one has resources to go out and enforce everything. So we have to do something else as well as enforcement. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Abbas, I just wanted to know whether you're recommending acceptance of both reports. Both reports. Thank you very much. Thank you. So this is the reference from Scrutiny is accepted, and we move on to item 10. Are there no other questions at all? Are we happy to accept the report? Yep. Thank you very much. Now move back to item 9 and the food standards report. Abbas?
This report details how Luton Borough Council will deliver its statutory food law enforcement service in line with the requirements of the Food Standards Agency FSA Framework Agreement. The Food Standards Agency requires the plan to be approved by relevant elected members forum to ensure local accountability and transparency. Where cuts to funding or resources occur, statutory obligations required by the Food Standards Agency as described in the plan will not be achieved, adversely impacting on the Council's public protection role. The plan was considered by the Overview and Scrutiny Board OSB on the 22nd of June 2021. The Executive is recommended to approve the Food Safety, Food Standards and the Feed Law Service Plan 2021-22 set out in Appendix A.
I'm open for questions on that report now. Yes, Javed.
Thank you, Chair. One question, are we able to, I welcome the report, have we got the resource to be able to enforce this? That's the key question I'd ask here, because it is welcome, this report. I think it's long overdue, and can we actually enforce it? Have we got the resource to enforce it?
I have Liz here. Liz, can you answer that, please?
I've got the answer.
Thank you. We do have resource within the team. Obviously, it's a busy team, as you can see from the report. It's not just food safety and standards that we are responsible for. We're responsible for other statutory functions, and obviously at the moment still the COVID work. The Food Standards Agency have recognised at a national level the impact that COVID-19 has had on environmental health, specifically food teams, as typically they're the teams that are engaged in the COVID response. And so there is a national recovery plan which we can tap into if we find that COVID-19 has to divert our resources. That said, we do have the COVID marshals, which are a very good way of enabling the COVID work to be you know, an offshoot really of the team and relieve pressure on the food officers. I think the biggest strain that we've got this next year is the introduction of Natasha's Law, which is around allergens. So there will be quite a big advice campaign for local businesses to make sure that they get ready for Natasha's Law, that they understand the requirements of that. And you know, we can never predict what might happen. We might get food poisoning outbreaks, but with the food programme, it is risk rated. We would always prioritise the higher risk businesses first and put the resource where the risk demands. You know, it is tight resource wise. We are quite a small team. Obviously Luton is growing, and we have had a big influx of food premises, particularly over this last year. The Food Standards Agency is providing additional funding for administrative support, particularly for unrated premises that still need inspection, to triage them, because we're finding nationally that a lot of people applied to become caterers, typically home caterers, over the pandemic, and then for whatever reason have gone on to do different jobs. So there is an element of working through that list and deciding and finding out which are still trading to then inspect. So, you know, we're an experienced team. You know, we carve up the inspection programme appropriately, but you know, it can sometimes be tight. And obviously next year when we come back with the report, we will reflect on how we did and what the challenges were.
Thank you, Liz. Javed.
So just to come back, because obviously you've highlighted the key risk is resource shortage. So that's what I thought I'd pick up on that. Also, are we able to adequately, because you've mentioned the good point about people home, because I'm seeing a lot of pop-up shops, you know, on people's driveways, anybody's forecourt, and there seems to be, we need to ensure that they're not food poisoning anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, again, there has been a massive influx of home caterers, and nationally and locally we have had social media campaigns, and actually contacted some businesses through Facebook on where they've got an open site, just to remind them that they do need to register. And that in itself, when we put that out through our Luton Council website, Facebook pages, we got a big influx of home caterers. Some people still don't realise. But so it is, again, it's a national issue. It's trying to find these people. So anyone who knows of someone who's catering, you know, we would always recommend that they check that they're registered with the council, they've got a hygiene rating, and if not, to let us know so we can then follow that up.
Thank you for that, Liz. I think my concern was more around the ones that are mobile ones. So they here today, there tomorrow. Can you actually keep up track with them? It's very difficult to nail them down.
So any mobile caterer has to register by law with the authority where they park the vehicle overnight. So if it's a Luton-based business, they need to register with us. We'd obviously inspect them, but it doesn't then stop them going, you know, to a neighbouring authority or to a festival to cater. And obviously that local authority would just do their due diligence check to make sure that they're registered with us.
Hi Liz, nice to see you again. I know before the COVID your team was doing a sterling job, and I remember our food service was best in the region. In fact, it was a traded services, and you were, you know, providing a service for a lot of chains, and it was a profitable sort of arm of our business. So I just want to understand, when we talk about resources, clearly you were sustainable and generating money. What has changed since then, and what has put pressure on the service? Because you did some fantastic work, you did a lot of closures, and you know you were doing fantastic. So I just wanted to know what has changed since then.
Well, in terms of the traded side, what you're referring to there for the benefit of other members is the primary authority work. So we do have dedicated resource, 2 officers that specifically do the primary authority work, and they're the account holders, and they work closely with those national chains. So that keeps that separate. And then the other side of the team are involved with the routine inspections, which this report mainly focuses on. Obviously, we were on a roll in terms of closure because we took a very hard line in terms of raising compliance locally, particularly when it came to pest control, to give out that strong message that it's just not acceptable to operate a food business with pests. And then, of course, we had lockdown. So, having said that, all through lockdown, we've carried on with our routine food inspection programme. And actually, when we do talk to other authorities, locally and nationally, you know, we pride ourselves because we've carried on literally, and we're in a good place actually. The Food Standards Agency recovery programme, I mean, some authorities are extremely behind in their programme, and I think, you know, there's several reasons why we've been successful here at Luton, in that we've got the COVID marshals, which has relieved the pressure, but also the way we've worked COVID with public health colleagues as well. So, you know, we've really managed it well. So I mean, just in the last few weeks, we've had a few closures, and obviously with this warm weather, you know, we're likely to get more, and that's just the way we roll, you know. And I think, like I said at Overview and Scrutiny, with the pandemic, a lot of businesses have gone online now with platforms, and that in itself has increased compliance, because some platforms will only sign up people if they've got a certain hygiene rating, and also people become more aware of the hygiene rating, so that puts the pressure on the business to achieve that rating of 5. So we have had a lot of businesses contacting us over the pandemic to improve their rating, or, you know, to get inspected to be able to get onto the platform. So, you know, it's had its benefits in a funny kind of way.
You then think the current resource that you've got, is that enough? Because clearly one arm of your service is making money, and we need to make sure that continues growing. But if it needs more investment, that because the work has grown now with a lot of online sort of business and deliveries and so forth. So, you know, in my mind, it would make sense to reinvest some of that money, make sure, you know, your team is strengthened, and continues the good work. If there's, you know, if you feel that there's more work that you need to do, because food is very, very important. We've got to keep people safe, and now the Luton is growing. We try to attract people coming from outside, and there are people coming from outside coming in and eating in Luton, and so our food standards have to be at the top end, and just, you know, so that we remain an attractive proposition for people to come in Luton, you know, wine and dine and eat in Luton.
Yeah, the thing with the primary authority, it is generally cost recovery, so we can't really make a profit on that. That's laid down in the sort of primary authority regulation. In terms of the other side of work, the routine food inspection statutory function, I do think, to be honest, we are leanly resourced in our team, given the poor levels of compliance that we've got, and you know, the amount of legal work that we have to do in terms of closures. And then it's not just the initial inspection, but it's the revisit. And our work is not just about enforcement, it's about educating, advising, which takes time, encouraging. And, you know, unfortunately, it's that element that sometimes has to go when you are stretched. And that, you know, I think businesses do appreciate being able to have time and contact with us and engage with us, because a lot of it is about coaching and advising, you know, as well as doing the inspection and the enforcement element. So, and Luton is definitely growing, and like you say, we would like everyone to be a 5, but you will get the chains and the individuals that want to do well, and they will, but it's that hardcore of lower compliance that really need to either improve or go, and that's, you know, where you're getting into that sort of detailed sort of work and seeing which way they're going, and then taking the appropriate action, which can, you know, be enforcement and takes up the time.
Abbas, do you want to come back in?
No, that's it. Just approve the recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
Are there any other questions from anybody? No? Are we happy to approve the report? Thank you very much. We now move on to the openly report. Tom Shaw?
Yeah, thanks, Hazel. So this is a report asking you to approve the funding formally for the executive to approve it. With something that's already allocated in the capital programme. You'll know the piece of land that I'm talking about in Silver Street. There was a culvert underneath there that was at risk of collapse and still is at risk of collapse, and so it's been boarded off ever since. And it was very costly to replace that culvert, but we've now secured just under £1 million funding from the European Regional Development Fund to create a new town centre park there, and the park will be created along with opening up of the River Lee, and funnily enough that works out cheaper than repairing the culvert to allow construction on top of it. So obviously it makes more financial sense to do that, and also we'll get a nice green space in the town centre and opening up of the River Lee, which is what some of us have been looking for a very long time. This will set the tone for the larger town centre developments that we want to do. So I do hope members will agree this. If we decide not to agree this funding to be released, we will have to replace the culvert or repair it at some point, and that will be very costly indeed. Plus then we'll lose the match funding from the ARDF. So I ask members to approve.
Thank you, Sian. Are there any questions from anybody? Javed?
So I fully support it. So the question I think has been answered. I was going to ask, is there any timescale on this, Sean, when we've got to spend this before we lose this money, the European Regional Development Fund? We'd be silly to lose that money. But is there any timescale on it?
I don't know what the timescale is, but Roger might know. But I know that we don't have long really when it's anything to do with European funding.
We will be within the timescale.
We will be.
We will be within
Okay.
the timescale. Yeah. Okay.
It's a
Thank you. Anybody else? Happy to agree the report?
Yes, we're happy to agree.
Thank you. I'm going to ask members now to accept the Regulation 4 of the Local Government Act and move us into private, please.